the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
So happy to be back for this one.
So, Lindsay, I feel bad. I know you're a little bit under the weather.
You might notice, this is not the first podcast that we've recorded where I've sounded super stuffed up.
Yeah.
I was emotionally ready to do this, so, why hold back? You want to talk about some Uncle Buck? We're doing it now.
We can't always be emotionally or physically ready to do things, so it's like you got to take one or the other. If you can get both in there, it's great, but most of the time I feel like we're both physically and emotionally ready to record.
Yeah, always.
You know?
I mean, right now I'm laying on a sick bed and I'm just like covered in like Lysol wipes and
open sores.
I'm just like snot covered right now.
I just ungauzed your arms so your skin could breathe for a little bit.
I'm basically the baby in a razor head right now.
I thought, wait a minute. I thought we were done with our Halloween season episode.
Oh man.
So
starting it off.
Yeah.
Coming out with this awesome comedy.
Starting the cold weather season with a sickness.
It's appropriate. Yeah. It's appropriate.
But hopefully we'll keep it light. We are talking about John Hughes's beloved Uncle Buck, starring none other than Canadian sensation John Candy.
Oh, John Candy.
Rest in peace to both of these
John Candy
gentlemen.
And John Hughes. We'll go further into this, but yeah, in case you didn't know, John Candy and John Hughes have both passed away, quite some time ago.
Yeah, quite some time ago. And I got to say, while we were researching this, the most I think I've gotten a little kind of like sad and misty-eyed while reading actors that have worked with them and directors, like kind of remembering their spirit. And it's been a bittersweet research for this movie.
It's not completely uncommon, but for two guys that work together multiple times to be so loved by so many people and just seem like really good humans, such a tragedy that they both passed, but they have both left behind great body of work. So that's going to be one of the topics we're going to get into for sure.
And this is the second time. So like last season we did John Hughes' Weird Science, and we're trying not to keep revisiting. We revisited Tim Burton, so this is the second time we're revisiting a director. But Uncle Buck is one that we've had on the back burner for a long time. It's one that I absolutely truly love. It's one of my favorite comedies, and it's always a movie that I think I watch this like twice a year maybe.
Yeah.
And I always walk away feeling a little bit better about life after I've watched it.
I think that's a common thing about John Hughes movies is often you do walk away from them feeling that way.
And I'll say it. I think this is John Candy's best movie. I think that his best performance is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but I think this is at least personally to me, my favorite John Candy movie, and I think his best movie.
Man, I don't know why I didn't think about this beforehand, but I mean, yeah, I would match you on those two. But I love him in Stripes. I'm also a sucker for that movie in general. But
yeah, and I guess like more, and so
it's a supporting character.
This is being his movie. Like he's like the top billed actor.
Yes, you're right.
So Uncle Buck, a lot of things, other than us just kind of gabbing about how much we love it, which we'll try not to do. We'll try to make this more about giving you some information, and we'll talk a little bit about John Hughes. When we did our John Hughes movie last season, we were pretty heavy on the Hughes talk, so I think this is going to be more heavy on John Candy talk. So we'll give you a little rundown on John Candy's career if you're not familiar. If you are familiar, hopefully there'll be a couple nuggets in there that you didn't know. And but we will discuss a little bit the working relationship between John Hughes and John Candy, because John Candy has appeared in 4 movies that have been associated with John Hughes, either as a writer, producer, director. This is somewhat of a straightforward comedy in a lot of ways, but there is a lot of depth to this movie, and so we'll kind of talk about how this movie is a little bit different It is very heartfelt. There is some drama, and talk a little bit about the perception of the movie, because when it did come out, it was kind of bashed critically by quite a few people, and I think that the character of Buck has really like grown on people. I mean, I feel like now he is viewed upon as like a beloved movie character, and this is kind of viewed upon as like more of a beloved movie than it was when it originally came out.
I look forward to talking about that one because I know what you're referencing, and yeah, the character of Buck, and I think a lot of the character dynamics in this movie are necessary in order for the progression of the story to grow into what it does and to end on the hopeful note that it does.
Yeah.
I think it's all very intentional. And yeah, I look forward to that discussion.
And we'll talk a little bit about why individually, personally, we think this movie is funny.
Yeah.
And then a little bit about, we'll talk about Candy's career, but a little bit about Candy in this movie and like what he brings to it and his sensibilities. Because there was a lot of people who were considered for the role of Uncle Buck. And I think it would have been a really far stretch for like any of these other people to
we'll
pull
get
off
into
this
it.
character. We'll get into all that. We'll get into all that in our discussions. We've got our picks of the week.
What's yours this time?
Mine is, I went for, I was going to go for a Hughes movie, and then I don't know. I was deliberating way too much on this. I watched like a handful of movies that I inevitably did not end up picking, and I ended up going with connected via Uncle Buck with Gaby Hoffmann in Now and Then, 1995's coming-of-age movie Now and Then.
Ugh, such a good one. So heartwarming.
And I hadn't seen it since it came out, so it was a good fun revisit.
Yeah.
And it's on Netflix right now too.
That's right, it is. Oh, that one. It had been a while since I'd seen that. I was really happy to watch that one again.
Yeah. And what was your pick of the week?
I went with Connected via John Candy, with a favorite of mine from 89. Who's Harry Crumb?
Oh. Wow. Okay. That's not the one I thought you were going with. I thought you were going to do Only the Lonely.
Oh.
That's actually what I even wrote on our board there.
Man, did I think I did say that originally, and
then I was going to do it.
Yeah, and then you were going to do it, and then I mean, honestly, I was watching that one and felt like it hit a little too close to home, and I was like,
Only the Lonely.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I just was like, I'm gonna shy away from that one. I'm gonna stick with Who's Harry Crumb.
All right, well, that's a fun one. All right, well, awesome. So those are our picks of the week. As always, our Murray moments. But before we get into our first clip, and God, it's gonna be hard picking a clip for Uncle Buck. This is one of the more quotable movies for me. But before we get into an awesome clip quote, our clip quota. What?
Clip quota.
What?
I mean, this entire podcast could just be clips
what is sitting
from
on the
this.
table there? Looks like a dead bird.
It does. Those are those old bananas that keep getting aged, and then they end up in Miles's
now
lunch.
I totally see it. Now that you actually, okay.
And then by the time they're in Miles's lunch, they're like black. And
I've
disgusting.
never noticed that till just now that those are bananas.
I've just
Okay.
watched this a lot recently.
Well, I guess your attention to detail is better than mine.
Well,
Now it just cut to the bananas, and it looked like there was like 15 on there.
Oh, my continuity
problems. See,
Shoot.
Now you drew it to my attention. Now all I see is just a bunch of errors.
What we're saying is look for the bananas in the opening
They keep
6
shifting.
minutes.
Yeah. So what's Uncle Buck about? What's the story of Uncle Buck?
When an unforeseen family emergency occurs, the bachelor pad having non-committal, slightly slovenly uncle is called in to watch after the family's angsty, rebellious teenager and her adorably sweet younger brother and sister and family dog. We go through, a week or two of Uncle Buck learning to be more of an adult, while his teenage niece learns to let down her guard a little bit. As with many John Hughes movies, there is a lot of sweetness and humor mixed in with real-life hardships that all kind of come together and wrap up in a nice, easily relatable package. This is a pretty heartwarming movie, gotta say.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
We'll go to a clip from Uncle Buck, and we'll come back. We'll get into our discussion.
Can't wait to see what clip we do.
Waiting for your sex?
Shut up.
Tia? What'd you blow all that makeup for? We're just going bowling. I'm not going bowling.
Come on, it's a great sport, and it's virtually impossible to get pregnant while doing it, if you catch my drift.
You're disgusting. I'll die before I go anywhere with you.
It's gonna be fun. They have rented shoes.
And rent a foot disease.
We've done the Battle of the Wills. The deck's stacked in my favor. You're just gonna lose again.
Try me.
How'd you like to spend the next several nights wondering if your crazy, out-of-work bum uncle will shave your head while you sleep? See you in the car.
So Uncle Buck, this is one of the few comedies, to me, laugh out loud funny. This is a fun movie to watch with people who love Uncle Buck, because in the group setting, I think this movie plays even funnier. I also feel that this is one of the few comedies that's pretty clean. You know, it's like nestled in like this sweet, endearing movie. It's PG rated. I think especially for the 80s was something that was really different. There were certainly a lot of 80s comedies that were kind of soft, but generally they were R-rated, and they definitely weren't family friendly. So I think this is like that perfect mix of very funny, really good script, very good comedic timing and actors, and then also something that you can sit down and kind of watch with just about anybody. And there's not anything like overtly offensive about this.
John Hughes really didn't ever escape that. Like, there were plenty of cringeworthy moments in some of his other movies, but this one, I think, yeah, while it is family friendly, you know, it's not to say that there's not cussing in it, that there's not adult subject matter. I think that this is, aside from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I feel like this is one of Hughes's most adult films, and while at the same time being kid friendly and also just an all around enjoyable movie for any age.
Yeah. I love that, you know, we live in the Midwest.
Yeah.
A lot of times when a movie, you don't see it too often, like a movie that I think sort of captures that like cold weather fall season,
without being a
early
Christmas
winter.
movie.
Yeah, without being a Christmas movie.
Yeah.
And I think this, that's what I love about this movie. You could have easily thrown a Christmas tree in a backdrop and made this like holiday-esque.
Totally.
And I love that that's not the case with this movie. I love that it's just a cold weather Midwestern film, and I think it really captures it. It pains me to know that this movie was going to be shot in St. Louis, in our hometown, and in 1988 there was an unseasonably warm winter, and so they had to shoot it in Chicago, which is where most of Hughes's movies have taken place. And God, how cool it would have been to have this like very like culturally significant and fun, awesome movie to go down in history as a movie that was, you know, Chicago's got a lot of awesome movies on that they can put up there and say like, this is awesome, but
St. Louis is cursed.
We don't
in
have
that
too
way.
many.
It's cursed in that way. We've got the memorable scene in Vacation.
We've got Escape from New York. But
we've got Escape from New York.
Of course, the coolest movie that has ever been shot in St. Louis, it's supposed to be in another city, and that's in the title. But like, how cool it would have been for Uncle Buck to be shot in St. Louis. But
you can think about that when you watch this the next time, know that the spirit of this was supposed to be in St. Louis.
Kind of getting into the humor of this movie, I simply think that John Candy has a particular comedic timing and style that I think works the best for this movie. And that's why I was saying, you know, I think this is his best role. Having sat down over the last, I guess, like 2 weeks now and have watched about
so many John Candy movies.
Like,
so many,
you know,
like almost all
8
of
to
them.
10 John Candy movies where he's like either the main star or like as early as Armed and Dangerous to my attempt about 3 nights ago to watch Wagons East, John Candy's.
You didn't do 1941?
I didn't do 1941, and
his part's really small in that anyway.
I tried to avoid anything that he was, you know, was only on screen for like.
Sure.
I did do career opportunities, but since there was the Hughes connection, but I think early on for me, like the Candy movies, he had played things more aggressively, like, or at least that's where they were written, of like this guy, like Summer Rental, a guy who's kind of like an angry character, you know, and I think that the 3 films that I gravitate the most toward with John Candy are all Hughes movies, Great Outdoors, Planes, Trains, and this movie, Uncle Buck. and he plays a gentler character. Still funny, still has all the timings that he does really well, like his expressions and reacting to things, I think is great. And when he's listening to people, watching him react and like try to figure things out, and like all his stuff with the kids in this, just his reactions alone crack me up because he's trying to understand them on their level, which I think is great, and which I think that is a smarter thing about this movie with the humor than other Hughes movies. And I think something that could be easily overlooked in Uncle Buck is that the way that the grown-ups in most Hughes movies have been, clearly they've been like idiots that don't understand children, and that's kind of
they're
how
kind of absentee a little bit.
Yeah, and that's kind of how the parents are played.
Yeah.
But John Candy's character, Uncle Buck, like really listens to them, and even when he's getting a hard time from Tia in the beginning, he's sort of responding like, okay, he's trying to figure out like what's exactly happening, but he's digesting it. And I think that the interplay between him and all the kids is some of my favorite stuff, which is essentially like almost the whole freaking movie.
It really is. And I mean, when we go, we'll go further into John Candy and why he's really good at that, but it is because he learned to be a master of improv. You know, a lot of these situations with the kids, and like you said, is basically the whole movie, deal with kind of two particular themes. One, that of family and family dynamics, and maturity in some fashion. And one thing that we mentioned in the beginning is how this movie got a little like ragged on a little bit for being aggressive or brash. And, you know, I see what's happening in that, but I think that in some ways you needed the conflict with Tia, who's the aggressive, angsty teenager, hating Uncle Buck. You needed the mom hating Uncle Buck and not wanting him to watch the kids. And the boyfriend of Tia, you needed all of this like animosity coming towards him in order for him to grow and for, I mean, the movie to have a story too. But this idea of how he deals with it and how he matures and how the people that are coming at him, how they adapt to that as well. And of course, the idea of family is, I mean, this is a family film. A lot of John Hughes films deal with family dynamics, whether it be, I think that this is actually one that is a little bit more like, okay, if we were to look at The Breakfast Club, we get a little bit of family dynamics in that movie, and it's kind of all crappy. It's all really crappy. And this, right from the very beginning, you know, we understand immediately that this family is kind of not unified. That, you know, older teenager is controlling of the sweet little kids who seem to be like the best characters actually out of everyone. And the parents are kind of not there, and that they don't have a relationship. So we set it up, and then by the end, after we've done all of this growth, it's like a perfect, John Hughes was just a wonderful writer in that way of just like building this story in an hour and a half and just wrapping it up in a beautiful bow by the end, and your heart feels like it could explode by the end of it.
and I will say there is, I get, you know, some of the criticisms of this movie being a little mean-spirited. The one thing when I watch this movie every time that always kind of throws me a little bit is how mean Tia's character is and how rough she is pretty much through the whole movie. Yes. I mean, and they, but then she's reacting because she did get kind of crapped on. She did get taken away from her friends, and she's that age where it would suck to like be taken out of, you know, you're old enough to like establish some more like firm relationships with friends, and leaving somewhere at 15 and having to relocate to a new school. And essentially it feels like in the beginning, like Uncle Buck's kind of like her punching bag, and it is pretty rough. But I do feel that by the end of the movie, by her having her that rigid and that mean, it does make her flip to trusting John Candy's character and like understand where he's coming from. By him not judging her so harshly at the end, she feels all that guilt and that remorse for how she's treated him and how she's treated her family. And I think that's why the end of the movie is so powerful, where she hugs her mom. I think that if she was like less mean and like they only did this quick little 5-minute thing, because you almost kind of grow to like hate her character in the beginning. It's pretty rough, and that's a bold move, and I think that's a lot of the criticism this movie got early on was from, you know, her character being that mean spirited. And you know, but I think it pays off. It
does, and you know that actress Gene Kelly, who played Tia, she at that time had I think she had gone through like 4 different high schools and had moved around a lot in her life.
Yeah.
So the idea of being, you know, taken out of your home environment and just kind of moved around and having that kind of like angst, like she was familiar with what that feeling was. And I think was super dialed in for this role. And maybe, you know, I don't even want to say over the top for this role, because like it's valid.
Yeah.
It's valid when you move, especially when you move in your high school years. Like my brother moved when he was a junior. I think he was a junior in high school. And granted, he wasn't like angsty like this, but it certainly completely messed up his whole high school experience.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, like if it comes off realistic, it feels like that could be the case, that, you know, you would have a reason to rebel, you know, not just, it's better to have some sort of reason in a movie for a teenager to rebel than just being bored. Yeah, and I think, like you were saying, it is necessary for her to be so mean towards Buck, just as it is necessary for Buck to start off kind of, you know, immature and childish in some ways. He's a big kid, but it's necessary in order to show his growth in the movie. It's like they both grow, but they both grow in different directions. And it's, it's just kind of beautiful how that happens. And kind of like leaning into like why this movie is so funny to us in general. For me personally, I like that this movie's not straight up situational. I mean, certainly most of the humor comes from the situations that he has to be in, like, you know, urinating in a little kid's bathroom where all the stalls are small, or like him, you know, the thing with his car, you know, they set up that his car like backfires, but they don't overuse these jokes. Number one, they don't overuse jokes too much. Like they'll come back once or twice to deal with his hat. And to me, so that's like one level funny. Then second level funny for me is how John Candy has conversations with people, like the conversations that he has with Shanice, his girlfriend, the conversations that he has with the mom. Those to me are funny in a whole nother level. Cause again, it's like the way John Candy like kind of reacts and like tries to work his way out of situations, or like trying to understand, like when he's talking to her about the, you know, what's a dog? How many times does a dog like that eat a day? You know, and just her response is like, how many times do you think he eats? 4 or 5. 4 or 5. And I should have told you that it's once a day. Was he like to drink water? Yeah, he likes water. Okay, he's been leaving the toilet seats up. Just that conversation alone cracks me up every time. And I love his response because it does seem genuine and it seems innocent, but it doesn't seem overly kind of staged or like overly improv. And I do know that John Candy is a great improver, and I know that from what I read, he improved quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But in earlier movies that I've seen of John Candy, watching all these in the last 2 weeks, his early stuff like Armed and Dangerous, a lot of those scenes feel like they improv toward the end of a scene. It almost feels like someone threw in something because the other actor's not quite responding to something. Yeah. But because a lot of these are like phone call conversations, they're able to cut it so that it's not like all in one shot, so that it doesn't kind of take you out of the scene. It's like they're able to like sort of like seamlessly time things in the editing. And I think that's where a lot of this movie gets the editing, and a lot of, to me, like there's a lot of little quick phone call scenes in this movie. And I think you get a lot of the information, a lot of the editing for those scenes. That cracks me up. Yeah. And that could be said too with even Shanice and Tia. Like there are a few times where just like the editing, whether it's not even with the phone, just like the way that again, John Hughes,
in editing. It happens in Ferris Bueller. It happens in so many of his other movies that the comedy is there already in the scene, but the editing adds a whole other dynamic that it just makes it even funnier.
And the other thing too, like the last sort of thing for me with this is that it doesn't rely heavily. I think like John Candy, a lot of the movies he did sort of relied heavily on physical humor, and also like maybe,
I'm glad you brought that up.
Maybe almost being like the sort of like overweight humor. And this movie doesn't really go for that lowbrow sort of like, oh, he's overweight and he's going to like fall into like, smash a table or whatever, which don't get me wrong, that stuff can be funny in its own, but this movie doesn't rely on that. There's a tiny bit of physical humor that's in there, and when it is there, it works. And then also
John Candy also really hated that.
Yeah.
He hated any type of like fat joke, any type. It wasn't his jam, but he did get talked into it.
And to me, I think I adore John Candy's laugh and his like sort of like laughing at situations in this. Him laughing cracks me up, and
he's got a few different laughs. Yeah.
And I just love the way he, the script to this in my mind is like one of the funniest John Hughes scripts. And just even his talking about when he's nervous, the way he talks to her when he's nervous and he's like over talking, he's just like, I don't know, I've just been eating a lot of cheese. It's just I can't get enough of this stuff. You think that's an allergy? He's like, I don't know, I just feel like a mouse. I just can't stop eating cheese. And she's just, her father's just had a heart attack. She's like,
he's talking
been
about
up.
cheese.
It's like 3 a.m. and he's just like sort of like, but I love that it's like this nervousness. And to me, it's not that anxiety, awkward humor. It's just, it comes off more endearing. And that's what I love, that John Candy has that style where it's like, I think, another actor might have taken it into a more like, how awkward, like a Ricky Gervais type thing. And he refrains from all that. He keeps it genuine.
It's very natural.
And it's natural. And to me, it cracks me up. I can't get enough of it.
I think it's because it doesn't feel staged. It just feels like it's what's coming out of him. And it's when a scene works with John Candy, he knows what's working and what's not.
And to me, he takes these opportunities because those are all moments that are required to move the plot along. In a comedy, a lot of times comedies can be slowed down because you need all the setup. Like you have to have it for story, you have to have it for the plot. And what I love about this movie is like all those setups are funny. Like the setting up his relationship with the kids, the setting up him getting to their house, going next door and like being really loud. And it's just like they find, John Hughes finds a way to set up the story, but at the same time giving us humor.
Exactly. The in-between scenes, even when we're not advancing the plot, the in-between scenes are still funny. Even a scene that does not matter, like the neighbor, Laurie Metcalf, she comes over and is, kind of half hitting on Uncle Buck. I love her in this so much. It's so awkward and makes me very uncomfortable. But yes, she's wonderful in it. But like the dance scene that is it's not really important to the plot other than his girlfriend walks in and assumes something's going on. But Uncle Buck like grabbing her by the head, like they're dancing and like the weird like close-up shots that are just, it's incredibly uncomfortable. But like
what is this, dirty dancing?
But it's just one of those things that's what we're talking about. The in-between moments that aren't advancing the plot are still funny and are not taking you out of the story and just making you kind of appreciate Buck even more. With the mean-spirited or perceived mean-spirited humor of this, there's so much that happens where Buck is defending people in the family, whether it's, the principal saying that Maisie is a daydreamer and, a bad student and she's 6 years old, and he gets super defensive of her and, verbally attacks the teacher, or Bug, the crappy, boyfriend of Tia, and he's repeatedly, those are some of my favorite scenes, even it goes a little extreme with Bug, but those scenes are all about, him defending the family, and that's all about his progression and growth as a person, and realizing that, this like having a family thing, I'm kind of kind of into this,
Right.
actually. So it's advancing the story while, yes, throwing in these kind of softball bits of humor that can be perceived as, kind of aggressive or mean-spirited, but it's not really mean-spirited because he's reacting to crappy things that are happening to the people that he loves.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't know. I don't buy that mean-spirited thing at all.
Yeah,
with
and
this.
and kind of what we're referencing here is like if you go back and it's hard to not go back and like read reviews of movies when they first came out when we're doing this when we're researching these episodes, and a lot of reviews of this movie were really poor, including Roger Ebert, who generally has a soft spot, I think, for humor, and he gave this 1.5 stars, and other reviewers just felt that the movie,
1.5.
yeah, and I mean, you've seen some of the movies that the guy's given like 3 stars to.
Yeah.
But a lot of reviews that we read, including his, were that the movie is like extremely mean-spirited, and but that gets in the way of the humor. So it was interesting reading, how much this kind of got ripped on, because I feel like this is always considered like a real charming, standard for heartwarming comedy.
I think that it's because it becomes about a defensive family type of story.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and go to another clip. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about Candy's career as well as some of the other casts in the movie, and then we'll move on to our picks of the week.
Sounds good.
What are you doing here?
We were just driving by, going out for some ice cream. Thought you might like to join us.
I said I would be home at 10. It's not even 9.
Who said anything about that? I just thought you'd like to join us for some ice cream. Maybe your bug here can join us. We can talk about burying the hatchet. You know what a hatchet is, don't you, Bug?
It's an axe?
Sort of, yeah. I got one in the car if you'd like to see it.
I'll pass.
Fair enough. I like to carry it, You never know when you're gonna need it. A situation may come up, say, for example, someone's been drinking and about to drive a loved one home. Then I like to know I have it. Not to kill, just to maim. Take a little off the shoulder, the elbow, shave a little meat off the old kneecap. Ooh. You got both kneecaps? I like to keep mine razor sharp, too. Sharp enough you can shave with them. Why, I've been known to circumcise a gnat. You're not a gnat, are you, Bug? Wait a minute. Bug? Gnat? Is there a little similarity there? Whoa, I think there is. You understand what I'm talking about? I don't think you do. I'll be right back.
So John Candy passed away in 1994, but he had a fairly long and lively career starting in the late 70s.
Well, like kind of early 70s.
Early 70s, okay. Do you want to bring us up to speed on
Yeah. He
sort of like pre-John Candy, John Hughes?
He had always been interested in theater and had done community theater for a great portion of his early life, and had a number of odd jobs, and was, a salesman and selling paper products here, or, just random jobs. Nothing really ever settled. And one of the last jobs he got fired from, his boss said, "I should have never hired an actor." And it was at that moment that John Candy was like, "Man, somebody actually thought of me as an actor." And he was like, "Okay, I'm making this commitment, and I'm going to follow that dream, and I'm going to take, paying acting jobs, or that's really what I'm going to go for." And he did. And I think it was, at a time where, man, I don't know, I wish I would have been around to say if this is true or not, but it feels like there was so much more accessibility, or things weren't as, it was all about who you knew and your friends and like that sort of thing, and building a community. And once you get in, a community atmosphere of actors, and you have a good core group, everybody starts to work with everybody. And so, John Candy really did fall into that. Yes, he did have, he did a few years, actually he did 2 years of community college in journalism. I was really happy to find that out. That was pretty cute. Didn't know that. He's a big writer, wrote a number of scripts, and then kind of was doing commercial work, fell into a just happy accident. And I love when I hear that things happen just by chance. He fell into this toothpaste commercial where they were specifically looking for like a like larger but like kind of boyish football player, like sweet looking man, and like that was John Candy. And he fell into this role, and then let's see, that kind of led him, we'll speed up a little bit. He was still taking acting jobs and doing community theater. And how he got involved with Second City was he kind of got tricked by Dan Aykroyd, which is really funny. So you have all of these kind of Canadian comedians hanging out, and again, friends, Dave Thomas, Eugene Levy, all of these guys ended up in Second City, and Gilda Radner as well. And Dan Aykroyd tricked him into auditioning for Second City in Toronto. And when I say tricked him into it, I'm saying that John Candy kind of didn't have the... he was funny enough to do it, and that's why Dan Aykroyd wanted him to do it, but he didn't have the, confidence behind him. And so Dan Aykroyd, they were driving down to the audition, and what he did was he put them both in, and he didn't tell John Candy until they got there, and then he got there and was like, oh crap, I'm doing this right now. They both landed it, of course, and pretty quickly after that, Del Close, who was the director of Second City in Chicago, really took a liking to John Candy, and he got shipped down to Chicago. And I might talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast. But it was at Second City where he really grew as an actor and his improv skills, and where he stayed for quite some time. And he was only in Chicago for about a year. He was shipped back up to Toronto, and it was right about that time when Second City TV started, which was basically the Saturday night, like Canadian version of Saturday Night Live. And man, there's so many stories involved in all of this that I'm just like kind of speeding through it. But it would be at Second City TV is where John Candy really started to blow up. And then, all these little tiny film roles start coming in, and he meets Spielberg, and Spielberg gives him a tiny role in 1941, which was a total bomb. And it was really Stripes, the Ivan Reitman, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray film that made a audience on a larger scale outside of Canada take note of John Candy. And from then on, I think we kind of know like where he went on from that. We have Splash, and let's see, God, I can't even remember the order of everything.
So Volunteers, another movie he did with
Volunteers,
Tom Hanks.
Summer Rental.
Summer Rental was like his first big. He did Going Berserk, which was like one of his first starring roles. It was a Canadian production, but Summer Rental, I think, was one of his first big movies. It was like 1985. He had like 3 or 4 movies come out.
And Vacation was like the same year as Going Berserk. Brewster's Millions, Summer Rental, Volunteers. That's right. That was 85. Armed and Dangerous. And then Spaceballs, I think, is one of his bigger roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then that's when we moved to Planes, Trains, and Automobiles and Great Outdoors and that sort of thing, and advanced beyond that. He's kind of always been around, and I mean, I could go even further into this. I don't know how much further, but I even grew up with the cartoon that he did, Camp Candy, that was... Oh, yeah. Do you remember that?
I do remember that,
I totally do. And that was kind of towards, the end of his career before he passed out, I think like maybe 3 years or so. It was before Cool Runnings. I'm pretty sure. But he had set up a production company because, he was still doing movies, but he wanted to spend time with his family, and had set up this production company to, still keep making movies, but also get his kids involved, or, like in some way. And like, maybe that's doing some voiceovers, and even his daughter is an actress now, Jennifer Candy. And I also found out, I didn't know that he partnered into co-owning a football team and he had always wanted to be a football player, you know, from when he was in high school, but blew out his knee, and that dream was kind of shot. So co-owning a football team was a realization, you know, and a very, very sweet realization for a man that was just so lovable. Anyway, that went on for just a couple years. I want to say maybe like 2 years.
And this was in the early 90s.
Early 90s, like 91 to late 93 or early 94. And then it was his last film, which was Wagons East. It was during production of that. It was when he found out that one of the partners had sold the football team, the Argos, and it just kind of crushed him. He felt really betrayed by it and had a few health problems. I think you were saying something to me earlier that he had talked to Catherine O'Hara, who was a good friend of his.
Yeah,
and
when he was getting ready to leave to shoot Wagons East, and they shot it in Mexico, I believe.
Yeah.
He was saying he was having a bad feeling about going down there.
You know, maybe you can say that it was expected. I don't think you really can, though. I memean, he wasn't in the best of health, but, you know, his father died of heart problems. He died of a heart attack.
Yeah, I think when he was like in his 30s.
Yeah. So it's a super tragic end to his life, especially for, I mean, you know, whenever anyone dies, you always, I think, you know, think the best, or think, you know, how could this happen to someone that's so wonderful? And I think we, you know, can always think that about someone. But but in John Candy's case, anyone that ever talked about him, he was just such a likable, good guy. And I read one story which really warmed my heart, because I kind of got into a little bit of researching Only the Lonely a little bit. And Maureen O'Hara, who played his mom in that movie, who's an old-timey actress, and she was in Miracle on 34th Street. Anyway, he loved her. And John Candy grew up going to movies and had, you know, his father passed away, and his mom, you know, she was a single mom and working. And, you know, he went to the movies. Went to the movies a lot as a kid and saw Maureen O'Hara's movies. And when they were doing Only the Lonely, he got the bigger trailer and she got a smaller trailer, and he asked, you know, why is that? And they said, well, you know, you're the bigger star. And I mean, it just warms my heart that the man was like, no, that's not how it's going to be. And he asked her to switch trailers. And he was always the guy that, I think he got ragged on a little bit for requesting a lot of things, whether it was water or snacks or, you know, all of these things for his trailer to have around. But it wasn't for him. It was for people that he would have over.
Yeah.
And he was very into
entertaining, making sure people had a good time.
Yeah.
Very, very giving.
Yeah. It seemed like he was a very, very generous person, and always had the best interest of people in his mind, and really loved his family. And man, just I really love researching him, because I knew some of the stuff, and there's so much more there. But the last movie that he was making was Wagons East.
And I know that both Wagons East and Canadian Bacon were dedicated to his memory, because they were the last two released post him passing away.
You know, one thing that I realized before we cut out this John Candy talk is that, you know, I've watched a hell of a ton of his movies in the last 2 weeks, as have you, Justin. And think what you will of some of them. You know, some are better than others. I was charmed by some parts in Delirious, but I get why that movie doesn't work completely. No matter how good or not good the movie was, John Candy's performance in it made the movie better. And that, I think, is something that's super important to note.
Yeah, I think his skill as an actor kind of was like leaps and bounds, you know, beginning with his kind of like long career with John Hughes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, definitely his acting, I think, in Delirious and in Only the Lonely, you know, he was showing a side of himself that we saw a little bit in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but saw like the full spectrum, like in both of those films.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to Uncle Buck just very briefly, and then we'll move on to our picks of the week. But just the cast of Uncle Buck, everybody has like, there's a few people like Laurie Metcalf that we said had tiny roles in it. But the kids in this movie, I think, are really great. We've got Gaby Hoffmann and Macaulay Culkin, and they're probably, 6 and 8 in this movie.
Such babies.
And do, I think, just like a phenomenal job. And to me, the whole precocious kid thing is always can kind of rub you the wrong way in movies.
You're not a fan of that.
I'm not a fan of it, but I think in this they're not really precocious. They're like kids, and they're just cute kids. And I think that they do a really, I love their expressions. The scene where he embarrasses Tia and he's saying,
where he pulls
he's
up
in front
outside.
of, he's out front. She's like, has anyone ever did anything? Has anyone ever embarrassed you? Like this bad. And he's kind of, he's thinking about it, and it cuts to the kids in the back seat, like their reactions. And it cuts back to John Candy. He's like, no. And then they start laughing. And then Tia leaves, and he asks, do you think she hates me? And Gaby Hoffmann's like, with a passion.
Is it the hat?
Yeah. And I love his interactions with them, and I think it's great because it does feel like he's becoming more involved in their family, and they really love him, and I think that the relationship with the kids in this is like really great, and I thought Gaby Hoffmann and Macaulay Culkin did great jobs, and I can see why Macaulay Culkin went on to get Home Alone, and because you can just see in this movie he's got a look about him and this intelligence about him that just kind of like jumps off the screen.
There's something about he and Gaby Hoffmann really stand out, and it's funny to say, as a child actor, that doesn't always happen, that you grow up and you still have a career when you're an adult, but they completely stood out in this movie. And it wasn't just, they weren't just relying on the fact that they were cute kids. They were actually like really cute and good actors. I felt like there are quite a few moments where Uncle Buck has independent moments with either Macaulay Culkin or Gaby Hoffmann, and just their independent scenes together, the way that they play off of each other. It's so welcomed by the children, but you can tell John Candy's leading it. But it's just the way that they vibe off of each other. It's just really cool to watch. And
they do feel very like sibling like, and even the Gene Kelly who plays Tia, like her reactions with them, they do feel very like brother sister, like sister. It feels very like they get along as a family, but they have their differences. And this was Gene Kelly who plays Tia. I know you brought her up a little bit in the first discussion, but this was her absolutely first film role. This was like her debut film role. She had done some theater, but auditioned for this and nailed the part. And I think she does like a really fine job. As like we said before, it's like she comes off very mean and raw, but for someone who this being their very first movie, I mean, she plays a huge role in this. Yeah. Kind of like almost like a central character in some ways outside of John Candy's character himself, and I think really does like an admirable job.
And that is something that's kind of unexpected, to have, the other lead role be the teenager in this movie, and also thinking that the dynamic of having an older teen and two young siblings, I don't think is ever really a dynamic that happens too often. It's like usually like a Brady Bunch thing, they're a few years apart in age. But it really does set that it sets a different dynamic between Buck and Tia.
Yeah. And finally, I think Amy Madigan is Shanice Kobylowski
of Kobylowski Tires,
who I believe she came up with the name Shanice herself.
She did.
She brings sort of the groundingness of Buck's character, and I think she's the reason why we get the good setup of Buck, of like, she wants to, she's like the voice of reason for Buck. Like we get the first sense of like this being like a serious movie where she's trying to convince him, I want to have kids, and I want you to start working for the company that I have, and it's a good career, and he's wanting to kind of have more of like a free life of like drinking and going to the track. not doing like the sort of 9-to-5 job. And I really think that she adds like this extra dimension to the movie that bases it more in reality. You get this sense that this is what she wants. Like, you know, you get this feeling of like, this is what she wants. She wants the dream. And at the end, when she's like, aren't they cute? And she's talking to Buck about it at the end of the movie, it's like you get this sense of like he's seeing more of a realistic view of the conversation that they had in the beginning of the movie. And I think you kind of see it comes full circle. Like you see like a sort of character arc of Buck, because this total dichotomy of the conversation about having kids and not having kids.
There is a scene that I've missed somehow in multiple viewings of this movie, but when Shanice is staying at the house with Buck and the kids, that he says something as he's running into a bedroom. We should have done this a long time ago. And she like playfully, you know, and laughingly like chases him in there, and they shut the door like it's going to be this cute romantic moment, and then like wait like 3 beats, and then the kids run in there.
Like, ah!
It's so cute.
Yeah.
And it's that John Hughes like wrapping up with a nice little bow at the end. And we know that, you know, that Buck has grown up, and, you know, it's kind of Shanice's dream, and the kids are happy, and everyone's gotten to be a better person because Uncle Buck's gotten to stay with them. Anyway, this cast is pretty wonderful. Mom and Dad, Elaine Bromka and Garrett Brown, aren't in it like that much of note, but I think they do a great job of, you know, not being like,
I think the mom sets John Candy up for some great bits in the beginning.
Yeah, she does. Her phone calls with him when it just makes me feel really secure that you're staying there like that.
Yeah,
it hurts. It very, very much hurts. But yeah, this the cast is very solid, and we should give a quick shout out to the boy who could fly, Jay Underwood as Bug. Does a great job.
I think he plays a scumbag really, really well.
Yes, he does. The legendary boy who could fly.
You ever hear of a tune-up? Yeah. You're not a gnat, are you, Bug?
Wait, gnat? Bug?
I don't know. Did you know I'm an amateur dentist?
You know,
Bug really gets what he deserves.
He does, and I think it is, if we're gonna say the one time that this movie maybe crosses a line, is probably the fact that, you know, when Bug really hurts Tia and Buck decides to get a little revenge
basically
and
kidnap
him, duct tape his mouth and put him in the trunk of his car.
And then physically assault him.
With golf balls. Okay, it's like the one time
Yeah.
the movie goes a little bit too far.
It goes far, but I think it still makes for a pretty funny scene.
And that's another reason that you can't really say that there's a lot of mean-spirited humor, because when you have a scene like that, it is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not reality-based. It would not happen. So it's meant for comedy.
Yeah.
Anyway, the cast in this is really solid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of great support in this. Well, let's close it out there on Uncle Buck. We might come back for a final thought, but let's move on to our picks of the week. Neither of us went for the John Hughes route. I went for Now and Then you went for Who is Harry Crumb. Mm-hmm. What can you tell me about Who is Harry Crumb?
Oh, you want me
Who is Harry Crumb?
You want me to lead this off? All right.
Yeah.
All right. So no one judge me for liking a good bumbling detective movie. And it's nearly impossible to not like the lovable John Candy. I mean, I feel like if you like him or you don't, and if you don't like him, why? Anyway, with Who's Harry Crumb, you throw in my childhood crush, Shawnee Smith, who we talked about in The Blob, and well, I'm already on board for this ridiculous comedy to come out of 1989. So this movie was directed by Paul Flaherty, brother of Joe Flaherty from Second City Theater. Of course, we talked about John Candy working with Second City. Joe Flaherty was a very good friend of his. Who's Harry Crumb is a lighthearted, ridiculous comedy caper about a clumsy yet brilliant detective. It's not a total masterpiece, but it's made by folks who know comedy. And if you're looking for physical comedy and John Candy in occasionally culturally offensive costuming, well, this is probably a movie you're going to like. The general plot is a daughter of a well-to-do family is kidnapped and held for ransom. Dad hires supposedly the best private detective ever, one who comes from a long family line of detectives. Enter John Candy as Harry Crumb, who is a great detective, but also a complete idiot at the same time. And in this reality, that's something that's possible. He gets some inside info and a sidekick in Shawnee Smith's character of Nikki, who plays the younger, overshadowed sister of the girl who's been kidnapped. Annie Potts plays the affair-having mom who's also plotting to kill her husband for his money. However, because of this whole kidnapping business, it's thrown a wrench into this murder scheme by diverting any money to potential kidnappers instead of into her greedy little hands. Harry suspects her as the kidnapper for the entire movie, which is not correct. Therefore adding to the comedy. Anyway, but the twist is the kidnapper is actually Harry Crumb's boss, played by Jeffrey Jones, who we probably all know as Ferris Bueller's principal, who's lusted after Annie Potts for years and figures with money he can get her to sway his way. This movie is wild and completely silly. John Candy never really liked humor at the expense of his bigger stature and often fell victim to it in some comedies he was in. I'd almost expect like that kind of humor in Who's Harry Crumb to happen, but surprisingly, it's mostly absent, save for like twice, which is impressive for a movie that has a ton of physical humor. But it's more about Harry looking like an idiot or getting himself into some awkwardly terrible situation that'll likely cause him some bodily harm. And if this movie were even close to reality, Harry probably would have been dead multiple times over. Though this is mostly a bumbling detective comedy, the scenes between Harry and Shawnee Smith's Nikki do offer up some heartwarming moments, and I think that this can kind of get lost in there. They're an adorable duo, and sometimes it looks like she's thoroughly entertained by his goofball charm, almost like they're caught in an out-of-character moment. And I'd imagine that Candy's improv ability served as a source of constant entertainment. As Nikki becomes interested in helping her find her sister, Harry provides an opportunity for Nikki to shine as his sidekick. She's been overlooked her entire life, lived in the shadow of her beautiful, now kidnapped sister, but her eagerness to help solve this crime shows her dad that she's just as special as her firstborn. It's kind of like the minor heartwarming part of the story. And as for the rest of the cast, Annie Potts always rules. From Crimes of Passion to Ghostbusters to Designing Women, I never tire of seeing her sass, and she heavily lays it on as this oversexed money-grubbing wife. And Jeffrey Jones's wily, spastic behavior is on point as ever as it was in the 80s. It's kind of what he was known for then. Maybe not so much now, but what he was known for in the 80s. And Barry Corbin, who I remember best from the show Northern Exposure, does the best that can be done with his one-dimensional, sad, clueless father of the kidnapped girl role. It's totally fine. It's not really about the supporting cast for the most part. This is very much a John Candy vehicle. Cameos by Jim Belushi, Joe Flaherty, and Wesley Mann cannot go without being mentioned. It should also be said that there are some culturally inappropriate and stereotypical disguises that Harry pops into for some undercover scenes. It's only about, I think it's only 3, maybe 4. These scenes are inappropriate, but I don't feel as if they're making fun of cultures. It's more about making fun of Harry and his clumsy investigative techniques. But as with any 80s movies, this potentially offensive disclaimer should be stated. And they are, relying on stereotypes, and there are plenty of cringeworthy moments, especially when Harry is in disguise as a Middle Eastern man. But okay, you've been warned, but it's fine. There have been worse things in the 80s. All in all, I find Who's Harry Crumb continues to kind of crack me up, even after many times viewing it. And you do have to like John Candy and his humor to be into this movie. His facial expressions, awkwardness, uncomfortableness, talking in circles, mucking up things constantly. You have to just give yourself over to absurd lunacy and abandon anything that makes sense. This is a silly comedy that's far from perfect, but still highly entertaining to me. Kind of makes me want to be a private investigator, but I know that that's not at all what being a private investigator would be like. You watched this recently, didn't you?
That's totally what it'd be like.
You think?
A private investigator, yeah.
God, It would be pretty cool climbing through some vents using walkie-talkies and a costume. I would do that.
Yeah, this is a movie I watched when we were going through our Candy movies, and this is one of the few Candy movies that I had never seen where he was the main star.
Yeah.
And so I had like zero nostalgia or anything attached to it.
Yeah.
And so just kind of like watching it blindly, it was a different experience for me. Maybe, I don't know. Like I loved the first half of this movie. The second half, not so much, but I do.
Okay.
The stuff with him and Shawnee Smith was so great.
Mm-hmm.
Like their relationship, I missed more of that. I didn't feel like it was a complete
Agreed.
lock between like their relationship and the outrageous physical humor that was going on. But the movie did remind me a little bit of the Ernest movies I love. Kind of like how the physical humor is like so over the top, where he's like hanging onto the fan and it's like spinning. That really cracked me up. And his bit in the beginning where his like ties getting caught in that machine is that's the kind of humor that I think like
there's like some Naked Gun style
humor
too.
and it's the kind of humor that John Candy, I don't normally see him do as much in a movie, and he did quite a bit of it in this movie, and some of it I found funnier than other moments, but overall I thought it was like an enjoyable movie, you know.
It's very silly.
Yeah, it is extremely silly, and it was almost like they set it up for a sequel that I guess never really came. I don't know if they were, but I don't think the movie was a very big hit. But
I don't think that it was, but I could see. I think at that point they were probably setting every movie up for a sequel.
Yeah, and this came out the exact same year as Uncle Buck, right?
Yeah, it did. But I loved it. It's cute.
Yeah.
If you're in for a wacky comedy, it's a good one.
Yeah.
Something that's not a wacky comedy is your pick of the week.
Yeah, my pick of the week was Now and Then.
Love this one.
This is a coming-of-age movie. It takes place over one summer in 1970, and that's where the majority of the movie takes place. Now, the beginning and the end of the film are present-day 1995, and it's 4 female friends that come together for a reunion. 2 of them have stayed in this small town in which they grew up, and the other 2 have gone on to, become successful. One is a writer played by Demi Moore. The other is a big Hollywood actress played by Melanie Griffith. The 2 that stayed in the town were Rita Wilson, who's a homemaker and is currently pregnant with a kid, and Rosie O'Donnell, who has become a doctor in the small town that they live in. In the beginning, the beginning movie kind of feels like they're caricatures. They're not really giving the adult versions of these characters much depth, but I think for a good reason, because we're about to kind of see where they come from. So you don't want to get rid of all that in the first opening of the movie. So then we flash back to 1970 of how they all became really, really tight-knit group. This portion of the movie that takes place over the summer, I think, is really riveting. This movie got a lot of flack in its time for being basically like a ripoff of Stand By Me. There's certainly a lot of comparable things that happen in this movie to Stand By Me. At that time, I mean, by today's standards, where there's very few original movies made, this movie feels pretty fresh when you watch it now.
That's true.
Not like there's a ton of coming of age movies about 4 girls growing up and being best friends. I could see how this could be categorized as like the female version of Stand By Me, and it is in a lot of ways, but I don't think in a negative way. I think in a really great way. And I think too, the time period plays a little bit better than Stand By Me, being in 1970. What this movie does is a great job of these little individual these little individual scenes of the girls having a moment where like this is the defining moment that locks them, is like, you're my best friend, like the moment that they have that they'll remember their whole lives. And it really does, I think, when you're watching it, at least for me personally, gives you those moments of like a defining moment that happens to you when you're during the formidable years of being like 12 or 13, like where you're starting to really understand your emotions and understand relationships with your parents and basically moments that like will impact you your whole life. And I think that the movie does a really great, genuine way of capturing those things. Really phenomenal cast for the young characters in the movie, played by Christina Ricci, Thora Birch, Gaby Hoffmann from Uncle Buck, and Ashley Aston Moore. And I think they do a great job. I think this is, again, a movie where you don't have these, you can kind of, the expressions that these kids do, like there is this moment of exploration and like, trying to understand what's going on, especially during that time period, during the Vietnam War. One particular scene I wanted to note is there's a special appearance by Brendan Fraser, who about 1995, I mean, Brendan Fraser was super hot. I mean, he was in starring vehicles pretty much all through the early 90s. And so at that point in time, it was like pretty significant that he would have this like tiny little bit role, but he plays a Vietnam vet who's just gotten out of the war, and he's hitchhiking, and he meets up with them and gives them all a cigarette, and they're all sitting there smoking cigarettes, which just, it almost just seems kind of weird, to see like a grown man and he's like offering cigarettes to these like 12-year-old girls. It plays, I don't think that this is a scene that would like be in a movie now. So it plays kind of strange by today's standards, but I think it's like one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And you can kind of see that they're listening to him. They're trying to understand, like they're very inquisitive about what's going on in the war and like what he saw. And I think that it's very interesting because you kind of, in that exact moment, you kind of see this time period where like the war and everything going on, even though they live in this very like cookie cutter existence and this like seemingly safe suburban existence, at 12 years old, they're inquiring about what's going on. And like, cause they, they're just seeing on the news every day, people coming home, people dying in the war. And so it's little scenes like that I think make this movie really something special. So after we get this experience, after we watch the girls go through an entire summer, we flash forward back to present day of the adults. And this time we get a little bit more understanding of where they're coming from. And, and they make mention of the fact that it's been a decade since they've all been together. In the movie, again, I can see the comparisons to Stand By Me. Demi Moore, who's the writer of the bunch, who has gone on to become a famous author, her character in the movie, she's narrating the entire film. So it gives you that, she fills in a lot of the blanks, where we kind of get what she's feeling and what the people are feeling. But she, at the end of the movie, kind of makes mention that, she needed this, like she being away from what they had, this bond that they had, this friendship that they had is what's like missing in her life. And I don't know, it doesn't come off cheesy. The ending of the movie comes off like pretty legitimately emotional and genuine. And I'll say that it's kind of strange. Like in my mind, I'm not a Rosie O'Donnell fan, but then we did A League of Their Own and I love her so much in that movie. And I forget that I love Rosie O'Donnell so much in Beautiful Girls. And she, again, in this movie, I think adds, there's like a softer side to her, and she can play the abrasive, like sort of angry, smart alecky characters all day long, it's totally ease, but I think she does. This is another performance of hers that I admire. And even though they're very short and and I think too, like it's very tough. It's like when you do the whole, like they're old and talking and then you flash back to the kids and you flash back to them. I think that's a tough thing to pull off. I think that's really tough to do, no matter who you are, actor, director. But I think they do a decent job. I mean, it's a little stiff at times, but I think it works very well. This is a very fun, enjoyable movie. If it's one that you haven't seen in a while, it's on Netflix currently. It's really worth visiting. It was one that got pretty badly bashed by critics when it came out. And I think I want to say, like, just from the little bit that I read of it, it seemed like it's gained like sort of a cult status among women who've like, grew up and that was a movie that they watched when they were a kid. So Now and Then, great cast, great ensemble cast, great little slice of life tale, coming of age tale. And then and definitely has some moments of like adventure. There's like an adventure story that goes on where they're searching for the mystery of this kid who died a mysterious death, and so that's part of their mission, their kind of what they want to accomplish that summer. One I hadn't seen since it came out, and I was really this was the toughest one for doing a pick of the week for me, so I must have watched like 4 different movies I was like deliberating on, and then when I looked up Gaby Hoffmann, I was like, oh, now and then I like kind of remember that movie. It was like, saw it in the theater 25 years ago or something, and about halfway through it I was like, no, this is the one. This is going to be my pick of the week. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It had been since this movie came out on video that I had seen it, so I was happy I got to watch it before I heard you talk about it. And man, yeah, there's so many surprising moments. It was like I was watching it for the first time. Like some things I remembered, but for being, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a kid's movie, but like a teen movie.
It's a mature teen movie.
Yeah, mature teen movie. It was surprising, and I loved that the different avenues, the stories in this movie took such a like adult turn. Yeah. In so many ways. And yeah, there were a couple surprising things that happened in it for me, and had everything kind of wrapped up nicely at the end. I really enjoyed watching this movie again.
And I thought this movie showed a lot of restraint during the 90s. There was like a gigantic batch of movies that took place in the 70s, or like sort of depicted that time period. And given the fact that like Forrest Gump came out a year before this movie did and was just like a huge smash success, I thought this movie showed a lot of good restraint and not overusing like, we're going to put a Creedence Clearwater song over this whole scene, or showing a bunch of news footage, or, I mean, I thought that it was like really reserved in a good way of not like overdoing it with like, here, we're in the 70s, people, this is the 70s. Like, we're going to show you everything that took place, so that we're in the 70s. I really like that about it as well.
Yeah.
Well, so those are our picks of the week, Now and Then from 1995. And
Who's Harry Crumb?
Who is Harry Crumb? 1989.
You're going to have to watch John Candy as a redhead in that too.
And not only that, him doing other characters as well. We won't get into that.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep on moving. Here's your Murray moment.
Chicks dig me because I rarely wear underwear, and when I do, it's usually something unusual.
I think I need a root canal. I'm sure I need a long, slow root canal.
You're gonna come and shake my monkey tree again?
Oh, what does that old queen know? She didn't even show.
Hey, this is so scrumptious. Is this hand shucked?
The flowing robes, the grace, all striking.
That was fun.
It should probably come as no surprise that Billy and John Candy were friends. They're both legendary comedians, they're both total scene stealers, and they're both born out of Chicago's Second City Theater. Sure, a ton of the most well-known comedians have come out of there, but check this. Back in 1973, it was Billy who took the green, still finding his footing, babyface John Candy under his wing. And as I said before, it was at the behest and trickery of Danny Aykroyd that got the Canadian John Candy to audition for the Toronto branch of Second City. And, John nailed it. He was shipped down to Chicago to get a better feel of the Chicago stage, but mainly because of the masterfully renowned grandfather of improv, Del Close, who was the director down there, wanted him to come down. John thought it was only going to be 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks ended up being a whole year. And Billy was also a fresh-faced addition to the 1973 Second City crew, but he was the one that really took a shine to John. Because Billy's older brother was the first of the Murray clan to join in 1969, Billy was mostly known as Brian's little brother at Second City, but steadily, Billy was becoming his own force on stage. I'll never forget when I first went down to Chicago, how in awe I was, John said, remembering the cast he joined, including Billy, Betty Thomas, Jim Stahl, and Ann Ryerson. I remember watching them perform one night and I thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never going to be able to fit in. I can't do this. And then Del Close, the director, leans over to John and says, you're going to be doing this on Wednesday night. Can you even imagine the pressure? Improv isn't the easiest, and as Billy has said so many times, you've got to be unafraid to die over and over again before you can create some true magic on stage. And that first night John was on stage, he was so nervous between sketches, in the dark. He ran into someone like straight in the face, one of the other players, split his lip open right before introducing a sketch on VD. I'm just going to let the comic irony of that just lay right there. Possibly to temper the nervousness, or maybe just because he liked the guy, Brian's little brother Billy decided to show John all around Chicago and make him feel welcomed. Billy and John were starkly different fellas in those days. John was more the quiet, lovable type, while Billy was more brash, something that John wasn't really used to. Billy cussed, he was a little on the darker side and very unpredictable. John was out of his element, but excited by Billy's excitement. John said of Billy back in 1986, he's the kind of guy who called me at 4 a.m. when the Iran-Contra hostages were freed and say, hey man, thanks for being Canadian. Candy'd be safely tucked away in his bed at that point, never thinking to disturb anyone at that kind of hour. This is my town, Billy said to John more than a few times, and it can be yours too. Billy took John to his first Cubs game, knew every single player, and gave John a breakdown of the team, even providing an insider's tour into Wrigley Field. They'd slam a few burgers at the original McDonald's or pack away some food at the first original IHOP. And then it was back to Billy guiding John around the city, even to some of the not-so-nice areas of town. John would later say Billy talked about Chicago as if it were this ancient historical city filled with breathtaking European monuments or something. Billy was trying to show John the brilliance of his new home, just the beautiful way he saw it every day as something truly magical. Back at the Second City main stage, Billy challenged the rules of improv, pushed every envelope, and it was why improv worked so well for him. John was still figuring out why he liked improv and why he was good at it. They both were still honing their skills, and they weren't perfect. Brian Doyle Murray was much more profesh than his brother, so sometimes it did get a little lonely out there for Billy and John at first, because they were both kind of green. No one, wanted to do a lot of sketches with them, especially for John because he was more on the reserve side. He still had a ways to go, said Joe Flaherty, who I've talked about before, a comedian and Second City alum. For a while there, John would disappear into a scene. If there were such a thing as being too much of a team player, John Candy, and learning to be free in those early days in Chicago, it might have been it. Before too long, John became one of the most beloved players at Second City. He was willing, happy, eager, and just genuinely sweet and warm kind of guy. Audiences loved him, and so did his fellow actors. I've tried to find a few skits of Billy and John together, but with no luck. Maybe a little bit of bad audio, but nothing fully. And there is one evidently legendarily awful skit that they did together called New Delhi. So drop me a line if anyone out there has a line on that sketch. I give anything to see them do anything together or hear audio of it, but man, to see a triumphant bomb, that might even be better than seeing something that totally worked. After a short-lived year at Second City in Chicago, John was beckoned back to his hometown in Toronto, back at the Canadian Second City, and he was totally sad to leave his new home. But out of that was born SCTV, Second City TV, basically the Canadian SNL, and history was made, friendships forever cemented via Second City Theater, whether those original players went to Toronto or New York. Billy and John would reteam in 1981's Stripes, one of my absolute favorite movies, and I'm not going to go into that right now because hopefully we'll talk about that movie at length, one of these days, but I could go on and on. You got to cut these Murray moments off somewhere. So for now, just think of baby 70s versions of Billy Murray and John Candy palling around Chicago. It kind of makes me smile every time I think about it.
That's awesome.
It's so cute that they formed a bond.
I wish that they would have gotten, Candy worked with Aykroyd so many times. It would have been awesome if Candy and Bill Murray would have gotten together and done a movie later on in their career.
I wonder if it was just a timing thing or what, but I mean, I know there was certainly that Canadian bond that cemented John Candy, and with Eugene Levy and Dan Aykroyd, and Bill Murray really wasn't in that. That's true. That vein,
yeah.
But everyone was, they were all involved with each other's projects. They were, they were both in Little Shop of Horrors, but didn't share a scene together. Everybody's involved with each other, but maybe not directly.
But at least they got stripes. So
stripes.
We'll do that one eventually. Well, thank you for the Murray moments.
Of course.
Always a pleasure. Do we have any final thoughts on Uncle Buck before we call it on this episode? I think the only thing I could really think of is that I feel like this is one of the few John Hughes movies where the music is less contemporary for the time. He does a lot more of what John Candy would listen to, not so much of, his other movies have a lot more, I think, like a new wave vibe. And there certainly is a little bit of that, but the music is less contemporary than other Hughes movies that came out at the time.
I think the only thing that stands out song-wise in this is the fact that it's Tone Loc's beginning beat. But other than that, it wasn't the typical John Hughes, make or break of a career of a British band.
He's very known as a music guy, so it was kind of surprising looking at it now, the music selection in this. But it works though. I think music plays a big part in the character of Buck, and
it definitely does. I'm kind of cracking up because the opening shot of Uncle Buck, there's kind of this very heartwarming, kind of empathetic, tune, score that starts.
The piano.
Yeah. And it's really kind of it kind of grips your heart a little bit. And then you kind of just burst that bubble for me when you were did you actually listen to the whole song?
Yeah, it was YouTubing songs from Uncle Buck, and it's a 6 minute and 50-second ballady type song.
If you don't want that song
they
ruined,
cut off the vocals.
John Hughes knew to cut off those
vocals. It almost
vocals.
sounds like it was scored for the movie, but it was just the first 45 seconds of the song, then goes into some pretty cheesy stuff, vocal stuff. But
John Hughes knew what he was doing with music.
I think he heard that section. He's this is how we open.
We need this. We're opening, but we're cutting off right as soon as the vocals start. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for checking out our episode on John Candy and Uncle Buck. We hope you enjoyed it. This movie, again, is so much fun to me. It's just a movie that makes me feel good, and it's one that I continue to revisit year after year when I know I need a pick-me-up.
And a movie that's just filled with endless quotes. I mean, I don't know how many we've said during this podcast
and off the mic.
I think one of my
I don't know how many quotes I texted you this week.
You have. I think one of my favorites from Buck, when Tia's really giving him a hard time and doesn't want to go bowling, is when he's like, "How would you like to spend the next several nights wondering if your crazy out of work bum uncle is going to shave your head while you're sleeping?"
They do that.
I'll see you in the car.
Music.
There's just so many things about this movie. Endless. Whether it's from Uncle Buck, whether it's from Tia or the kids, John Hughes knows how to write dialogue, or knew how to write dialogue.
We hope you've enjoyed our talk on Uncle Buck.
Yes.
What do we have coming up next episode?
I think...
oh my goodness.
I know. We're doing one that you are super stoked about, and
That's right.
I couldn't be more excited to do this one.
We're doing Walter Hill's The Warriors.
Get ready, y'all.
And I'm excited because
this is
going to be my opportunity to just sort of go on this Walter Hill early career marathon. Just sometimes we do these episodes and it gives me a reason to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm certainly going to take advantage of that. I'm going to dig in and do the first 5 movies that Walter Hill did. And
it's going to be 90% you and 2% me. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking.
I'm excited.
I'm really
I've been
excited
wanting to
about
do
it
the
too.
Warriors for a while, and I'm excited to.
This is going to be the theatrical cut of The Warriors,
Yes.
not the director's cut.
Though I'm going to watch the director's cut just so we can talk a little bit about that, but we'll get into that. There's all kinds of
it's
we're
a
gonna
whole
get
thing.
that's all
Yeah,
next
blah, blah,
episode.
blah,
Well, thanks for listening. You can catch us on social media and Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Don't Push Pause Podcast. If you want to check out any of our back episodes, we have an archive on our website at don'tpushpausepodcast.com. If you listen to us on iTunes, if you're an Apple user, it always helps. If you think that we're worthy enough, please give us a good rating, leave us a review.
It really does help us, guys.
And it does lets us know that people are out there listening. Always feel free to contact us anytime you want. We love hearing from people at don'tpushpausepodcast@gmail.com.
And Justin, I was wondering if this hat I'm wearing, if it angers you. It angers a lot of people. I'm just just wondering, like, the sight of it is just upsetting. Anyway, I'll tell you a story about that later.
All right, we'll do it off the mic.
Off the mic.
Until next time, I'm Justin Johnson.
And I'm Lindsay Reaper.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.